At 1:58 a.m., in the frozen silence of an Alaskan blizzard, a terrified 9-year-old girl pressed a crumpled note against the window of a black SUV. One word, written in shaking hands. Help. The storm swallowed her voice, but it didn't silence her prayer. Not far away, Ethan Cole, a 40-year-old Navy SEAL veteran with a wounded knee and a past he never talks about, was filling his truck at a deserted gas station. Beside him stood Shadow, his 5-year-old German Shepherd service dog, trained to sense danger long before humans could. The wind howled across the empty lot, carrying a scent Shadow recognized instantly. Fear. Child-sized fear. Within seconds, Ethan and Shadow locked onto the SUV sitting in the shadows. They had a choice: look away, or risk everything in a storm that had already swallowed the highway. What happened next would turn an ordinary winter night into a fight between life and death, and reveal that sometimes God's angels don't come with wings. Sometimes, they arrive wearing a Navy coat and walking beside a loyal German Shepherd. SOS signal in the middle of a white storm. Snow swirled like torn paper under the frozen streetlights, turning the Anchorage night into a white, breathless void. The digital clock on the dashboard of the black SUV glowed 1:58 a.m. in harsh red numbers. Inside the vehicle, the air smelled of old coffee and stale fast food, but all Emily Parker could taste was fear. Emily was 9 years old, small for her age, with light brown hair that fell in tangled waves around her pale face. Her cheeks were blotchy from crying, her nose red from the cold that seeped through the thin jacket she wore. Her wrists burned where the plastic zip ties bit into her skin, the edges cutting more deeply every time she moved. She tried not to move. The man had told her what would happen if she screamed. He had leaned close, his breath sour against her ear, his voice low and poisonous. He had said he knew where her mother lived. He had said he had pictures. He had shown her a knife. Now, in the eerie half-dark of the SUV, Emily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribcage. Her breath came in short, shaky bursts, fogging the window beside her. She could see nothing outside but shifting bands of white as the blizzard raged. The world beyond the glass felt far away and unreachable, but the notebook paper in her lap felt real. Her fingers, purple at the tips from the cold, shook as she tried to hold the small, torn sheet steady against her knees. Every letter she scratched with the dull crayon felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The plastic restraints cut into her skin, but she forced her hands to move anyway. HELPME. The letters were crooked, pressed so hard the paper nearly tore. Emily stared at them, her throat tightening. What if no one sees it? The thought stabbed through her. Her eyes burned, and more tears welled up, blurring the shaky words. For a moment, a wave of hopelessness nearly crushed her. She saw her mother's face in her mind, tired eyes, warm smile, the way her hands always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and vanilla lotion. Emily didn't know if she would ever see that face again. No, I have to try. She swallowed a sob and forced herself closer to the window. The engine hummed softly. Somewhere in the front seat, the man was muttering to himself, flipping through his wallet, checking his phone. He wasn't looking back, not yet. Emily pressed the paper against the cold glass. Her knuckles brushed the window, and the chill shot up her arm like a knife of ice. She pushed the note harder, hoping, praying, begging silently that someone outside would be looking. Outside, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the gas station, Ethan Cole finished locking the nozzle back into the pump. He straightened slowly, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the snow-dusted concrete. Ethan was around 40, tall and strongly built, though there was a weariness in the way he carried himself. His shoulders were squared by habit, but his left leg betrayed him with a subtle stiffness each time he shifted weight, a lingering ache from a combat injury years ago. His face was sharply defined, square jaw, straight nose, a slightly high forehead half hidden under a simple black knit beanie. Dark stubble framed his mouth and chin, trimmed into a neat beard with a few strands of gray starting to show near his temples. His eyes were a deep, serious brown, the kind that softened when he smiled, but could turn hard and focused in an instant. He wore a navy blue winter coat that fell to mid-thigh, practical and well-worn, over a red and black flannel shirt. Faded jeans and scuffed brown leather boots bore the marks of long winters and long roads. On his beanie, a small metal pin gleamed under the station lights. U.S. Army veteran. The pin was the only part of his past he allowed strangers to see. Inside his chest, memories moved like ghosts. dusty roads and places that no longer had names, nights spent listening for sounds other men never heard, the weight of decisions made in seconds that changed lives forever. Ethan didn't talk much about those years. He preferred silence, stillness, order. At his side, as constant as his own shadow, stood Shadow. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, in his full strength, with a powerful, muscular frame under a coat of black and tan. His back was a slick, gleaming black, while his legs and face were shaded in warm brown and gold. A sturdy black harness wrapped around his chest, the white letters across it stark and clear. Service dog, do not pet. Shadow's ears stood tall, perfectly erect, his head slightly tilted as he surveyed the nearly empty lot. His eyes, a deep amber, burned with keen intelligence. This was a dog who noticed everything: the distant rumble of a truck on the highway, the tiny shift in his handler's breathing, the subtle tremor in a frightened child's voice. Normally, when they stopped like this, Shadow would stand calmly at Ethan's side, waiting for a quiet cue. But tonight, something was wrong. The dog's body suddenly went rigid. His gaze snapped away from the pumps, drawn toward the far side of the lot, where a black SUV idled near the edge of the snow-plowed area. The windows were dark, streaked with frost. Ethan felt the tension in the leash even before Shadow moved. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. His voice was low, steady, carrying the calm authority of someone used to giving orders under fire. Shadow took one step forward, then another, his nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he tasted the air. There it was, something sharp and sour beyond the smell of gasoline and cold metal. Fear. A very specific kind of fear. Small, frantic, trapped. A child's fear. Ethan followed his line of sight. At first, the SUV looked ordinary, just another vehicle trying to survive the storm. Then he saw it. A small rectangle of paper pressed against the rear side window. The glass was fogged from the inside, but in the glow of the overhead lights, he could make out jagged letters, written in a child's unsteady hand. He couldn't see the whole message from this angle, but he saw enough. H-E. His pulse hitched. Inside the SUV, Emily blinked away tears, her breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. The cold from the window bit into her forehead. Her hands ached, but she held the paper there, as if her life depended on it, because it did. Then, for the first time, she heard something besides the wind and the low rumble of the engine. A bark, soft, controlled, almost like a whisper. Emily jerked, eyes widening. She couldn't see where it came from, but the sound cut through the numbness in her chest. Someone was out there. Someone had seen her. Her heart leapt, slamming into hope so quickly it almost hurt. Please, please, please. She pressed the paper harder against the glass. At that exact moment, the driver's door opened with a harsh click. The freezing air rushed into the SUV as Derek Hayes swung himself halfway inside. Derek was in his early 40s, with greasy brown hair shoved under a faded baseball cap. Dark circles bruised the skin under his pale blue eyes, eyes that never seemed to rest on anything warm or gentle. His jaw was unshaven, patchy stubble crawling along his cheeks like shadows he couldn't quite shave away. His heavy gray parka smelled of old cigarettes, sweat, and something sour that made Emily's stomach churn. There was a twitchiness in the way he moved, a constant nervous energy, as if he was always one bad decision away from snapping. He was about to slam the door when his gaze flicked to the back seat, to the window, to the note. For a heartbeat, the world froze. His eyes narrowed as he leaned inside, taking in the crumpled piece of paper, the shaky letters. The small hands pressed desperately against the glass. "Help me." The softness left his face. What remained was something cold and venomous. Emily's chest collapsed around a sob. Tears spilled down her cheeks in hot streams, instantly chilled by the winter air. Outside, Shadow's lips peeled back just enough to reveal a glint of teeth. A low, warning growl rolled from his chest. Quiet, but deadly serious. Ethan's hand tightened on the leash, his instincts sharpening into a single, clear line of thought. Something terrible was happening in that SUV, and no one knew yet whether he and Shadow would be in time to stop it. When the Navy SEAL instinct awoke and the blizzard snow crashed sideways across the dark highway, turning the world into a shifting maze of white and shadow. The blizzard had grown harsher in the last minute, the wind shrieking like something wounded. Ethan Cole felt every nerve in his body harden into alertness, the way they once had during night raids in countries most Americans would never learn to pronounce. Shadow crouched low, muscles drawn tight like tempered steel. His tail stiffened, his ears pointed forward, and a soft growl vibrated from his chest, controlled, focused, a professional warning from a dog trained to work with soldiers. Ethan recognized the signal instantly. Something was escalating. He pressed his hand briefly against Shadow's back, grounding the animal while grounding himself. His left knee ached sharply, a reminder of the mission years ago when an explosion had thrown him against a collapsed wall. The pain sharpened his focus instead of dulling it. Ethan had learned to treat it like an alarm bell. He raised his phone. Come on, come on. No signal. The screen glowed uselessly, mocking him. The storm swallowed cell reception whole. Inside the SUV, Derek Hayes was no longer pretending to be calm. The man's face twisted with a kind of desperate malice as he ripped Emily's handwritten note in half, tossing the pieces onto the floor like scraps of trash. His fingers were trembling, whether from cold, panic, or mental instability, Emily couldn't tell, but she felt it like a spike of dread. Derek yanked her by the hair, jerking her small body upright. "Who the hell do you think you're signaling, huh?" he snarled. His voice cracked with something feral. Emily's breath hitched. Tears spilled down again, half frozen on her cheeks. She tried to twist away, but the zip ties cut deeper. A small drop of blood darkened the sleeve of her pink jacket. Derek's heavy boots stomped on the gas pedal instinctively as he slammed the door shut. He was unraveling, fast. Shadow circled behind the SUV, moving with unnerving grace for such a large dog. Every step was nearly silent despite the crunch of deep snow. His training took over, tracking, strategizing, assessing every angle of danger. He barked once, short, sharp, a precise signal that Ethan knew meant, he's fleeing. Derek froze for a second at the sound, eyes flicking to the side mirrors. Panic thundered through his expression. Outside, Ethan sprinted across the icy ground, boots slipping for a fraction of a second before his body recalibrated. He slammed his palm against the SUV's window, voice booming through the storm. "Stop the car! Let the girl go!" For a moment, their eyes locked. Ethan's dark and blazing, Derek's pale and frantic. Then Derek screamed wordlessly, stomped the accelerator, and the SUV fishtailed violently. Snow blasted outward in a vicious arc as the tires spun, the vehicle twisting nearly sideways, before it caught traction and lurched forward. Emily was thrown against the seat, a cry escaping her throat. Panic clutched at her lungs. She looked out the rear window and saw the dark outline of the man shouting, then the shape of a huge dog sprinting toward them. "Shadow, go!" Ethan roared. The German Shepherd surged forward, launching into full pursuit. Ethan didn't waste a second. He spun on his heel and bolted back toward his truck, an old silver Ford whose age was masked by the way Ethan had maintained it, with a soldier's precision. The truck had survived ice storms, mountain roads, and a few classified locations. Tonight, it would have to survive a chase. He ripped the door open and climbed in, fingers moving faster than thought. The engine coughed, then roared awake. The moment the tires hit the snow-packed asphalt, the truck skidded. Ethan corrected sharply, jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to the mirrors. Shadow was already ahead of him, running with terrifying speed for an animal weighed down by storm wind. Snow sprayed behind his paws as he tore up the ground, tail straight, ears pinned forward. His breath puffed out in harsh bursts of steam. Inside the SUV, Emily's heartbeat hammered so loudly she thought Derek could hear it. Her gaze darted wildly, searching for anything, any sign that the man outside might still be following. Then she spotted it, two headlights cutting through the white curtain of snow, fighting to keep up. And beside them, just for a second, she saw a shadowy shape racing low to the ground. Hope flared so sharply in her chest that it hurt. Derek swore loudly, slamming his hand against the steering wheel as he tried to maintain control. The storm made visibility nearly impossible, and his panic made every movement sloppy. "Stupid storm! Stupid dog! Stupid kid!" he snapped, knuckles white on the wheel. Ethan pushed his truck harder. The blizzard clawed at the windshield, the wipers struggling. His grip tightened. His mind cataloged every possible move Derek could make, every hazard the storm could hide, every way this could go wrong. He refused to let it go wrong. "I've lost enough children in this world," Ethan thought. A memory flashing of a mission years ago, a village, a failed extraction, a silence too heavy to forget. Not tonight, not this girl. He lowered the window despite the freezing wind and called out, Shadow, keep eyes. Shadow barked once in acknowledgement, never breaking stride. Ahead, the SUV suddenly swerved left, too sharply. Derek was losing control. The vehicle spun halfway, skidding sideways across the snow-covered highway, headlights slicing crooked paths through the blizzard. Ethan's breath caught. He slammed the brakes, his truck jolting. Shadow veered off instinctively, avoiding the spinning SUV by inches. The SUV finally slammed to a halt, crooked and stuck in a growing drift of snow. Emily whimpered softly, her breath fogging the glass. Ethan's eyes locked on the immobilized vehicle, and Shadow's growl rippled through the storm. This wasn't over, not even close. The chase at the edge of life and death. The storm pressed down harder now, turning the Seward Highway into a trembling ribbon of white that stretched into darkness. Wind clawed at Ethan Cole's coat as he jumped from his truck, boots sinking into the snowpack with a muted crunch. The cold bit into his skin instantly, but he hardly noticed. His focus tunneled into one single truth. Derek Hayes had a knife, and Emily was in his hands. Shadow halted only a few yards ahead, body low, hackles raised in a stark ridge along his spine. His breath came in sharp bursts, steam swirling around his muzzle. The dog was a living wire of tension, silent, deadly, waiting for Ethan's command. Derek yanked Emily out of the SUV, nearly throwing her onto the icy ground. The girl stumbled, her knees buckling. A choked sob escaped her, but she forced herself not to scream, terrified that any sound would make the knife at her neck dig deeper. Ethan saw everything in brutal clarity, the terror on Emily's blotchy, tear-streaked face, the white-knuckled grip of Derek's hand, the glint of silver trembling at her throat. "Don't come closer," Derek shouted, his voice cracking under the blizzard's roar. Ethan lifted his hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not moving," he said, keeping his tone low, even. "But you need to put the knife down." Derek's eyes darted wildly. He was sweating despite the freezing air, his breath coming in short, frantic bursts. His graying stubble was crusted with ice, giving him the look of someone teetering on the edge of collapse. "You think I'm letting her go?" he snarled. "I know what happens when they catch people like me. I'm not going to prison again." Ethan's jaw tightened. Again. The word slammed into him like a punch. His mind raced. The man was spiraling, cornered and unpredictable. Inching slowly to Derek's left, Shadow growled, a deep rumble that vibrated through the frozen air. Derek jerked the knife closer to Emily's neck. "Call that dog off or she's done." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Shadow," he said quietly, "hold." The dog froze, though every fiber in him begged to leap. Snow whipped hard into Ethan's face, stinging his skin. He blinked it away, keeping his eyes fixed on Derek. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said. "There's still a way out." "There's no way out for me," Derek barked. His voice pitched high, unstable. His pupils were dilated, unfocused, a man trapped in his own crumbling mind. Emily whimpered softly. Her small shoulders shook beneath the thin pink jacket. The sound cut a wound through Ethan's chest. He took a breath, slow and controlled. His body lowered a fraction, shifting his center of gravity. Derek didn't notice. His gaze flicked toward the highway, as if searching for a miracle escape. But one thing Ethan noticed, and seized on instantly, was the distant flicker of headlights, approaching from behind Derek, half hidden by the snowstorm. A vehicle was coming. The timing might be disastrous, or it might be the opening Ethan needed. He kept talking, his voice softer now, pulling Derek's attention back. "You're scared," Ethan said. "I get it. But hurting her won't fix anything. You let her go, you walk away alive. That's the only chance you've got." "You don't know anything," Derek shouted, but the tremor in his arm deepened. His grip on Emily faltered for half a second. A half second was enough for Shadow. The dog lowered even further, hind paws digging into the snow. His body trembled with coiled energy. The approaching vehicle slowed as it neared, its headlights casting a wide beam over the scene. The beam swept across the three of them, Ethan, Derek, Emily, like a stage light catching actors mid-scene. Derek flinched at the brightness. In that instant, Emily tried to twist her head away from the knife. Not much, just an instinctual flinch. The movement startled Derek, who jerked the blade downward, attempting to regain control. He overcorrected. Shadow launched. The German Shepherd flew through the air with a terrifying grace, jaws wide enough to discern but precise enough not to harm the child. He collided with Derek's wrist, crushing down with a sharp, decisive bite. Derek screamed, the knife flying from his grasp and skittering across the ice. Ethan moved before the echo faded. He rushed in, grabbing Emily and pulling her tight against his chest, shielding her body with his own. She sobbed loudly, the sound muffled against his coat. Shadow kept Derek pinned, growling low but not ripping, controlled, professional, the perfect soldier. The headlights grew brighter as the approaching vehicle came to a full stop. The door opened and a woman stepped out, bundled in a heavy maroon parka. She was tall and slender, with copper-toned skin, long dark hair braided over her shoulder, and sharp, observant eyes. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with an expression both determined and weary, someone familiar with hard winters and hard nights. Her name, as Ethan would learn soon enough, was Sarah Lindholm, a local EMT heading home after a grueling shift. Sarah's gaze swept the scene with trained clarity, assessing danger in seconds. "Oh my God, do you need help?" she called, or Indy stepping forward. Ethan nodded, still holding Emily tightly. "She's hurt, and he's dangerous." Sarah fumbled for her radio, her voice professional despite the shock. "This is Unit 4-3. I've got a child victim and a violent suspect off Seward Highway, mile marker 12. Immediate backup requested." Derek writhed under Shadow, clutching his bleeding wrist, but his fight was gone. Panic had hollowed his face, leaving him looking small and broken. Emily clung to Ethan, trembling uncontrollably. Sarah approached carefully, her breath forming clouds. "Is she bleeding? Hypothermic?" "Both," Ethan said, his voice roughening. His arms tightened protectively around the child. "We need to get her warm." The storm howled louder, as if punctuating his urgency. Shadow stood guard, eyes locked on Derek, ready to react at the slightest twitch. The crisis wasn't over, but the rescue had begun. The white night of danger and the decisive fall, snow spiraled wildly in the flashing red and blue lights as 3 patrol cars skidded to a halt, their tires carving deep arcs into the icy highway. For a brief second, the world felt split between chaos and salvation, one half illuminated by the desperate glow of police lights, the other swallowed by the relentless blizzard. Ethan Cole tightened his arms around Emily, instinctively shielding her from both the wind and the danger still lingering in the air. Her small body trembled against his chest, breath hitching in uneven sobs. He could feel the frantic staccato of her heartbeat through his coat, fast, terrified, but alive. Shadow stood beside them, chest rising and falling in rapid bursts. His fur was dusted white with snowflakes, and though his breath steamed heavily, his eyes stayed locked on Derek Hayes. The German Shepherd's stance was coiled, protective, ready for another command if needed. Derek, clutching his injured wrist, stumbled through the snow toward the edge of the road. Panic distorted his features. His pale blue eyes darted everywhere, looking for an exit that didn't exist. Blood dripped from the bite wound, staining the pristine snow with dark streaks. "Freeze!" a voice commanded. A police officer stepped out from the nearest cruiser. He was a tall man in his early 40s with a thick brown beard trimmed close to his jaw. His heavy winter uniform looked almost too small for his broad shoulders. This was Officer Brent Halverson, a veteran cop known around Anchorage for being stubbornly calm under pressure, calm enough that people whispered he'd once walked into a hostage situation simply because he believed no one else would. His pale skin was reddened by the cold, and his breath fogged in steady bursts as he aimed his service weapon at Derek. Behind him emerged another officer, this one much younger, a woman in her late 20s with sharp cheekbones, caramel-colored skin, and tightly coiled black hair pulled into a bun under her hat. Officer Dana Brooks had been with the department for only 3 years, but had a reputation for being quick-thinking and fiercely empathetic. Tonight, however, her eyes were hard, fixed fully on the suspect. "Hands up!" Brooks shouted. Derek barely lifted his good hand before Shadow growled again, a deep territorial rumble that made even the officers flick their eyes toward the dog. But Ethan gave a quiet command without looking away from Derek. "Shadow, guard." Shadow immediately eased back 2 steps, but his eyes never wavered. Derek's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him like someone pulled a plug. His breath came in uneven gasps as the officers advanced, forcing him to the ground and securing his hands with cuffs. Only when Derek was strapped securely and pulled away from the scene did Ethan finally allow himself a real breath. The tension in his chest loosened just enough for him to realize his hands were shaking. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. Emily clung to him tighter. Am I really safe?" she whispered, voice raw and fragile, barely audible above the storm. Ethan bent his head slightly, resting his cheek against the top of her hair. Yes, sweetheart, he murmured. You're safe. I've got you. Sarah Lindholm, the EMT who had stopped earlier, hurried toward them again, her boots sinking deep into the snow. The wind plastered her long, dark braid against her maroon parka. Her copper-toned skin looked almost golden under the swirling lights, though her expression was pinched with concern. Let me take a look at her, Sarah said, gently touching Emily's shoulder. Emily recoiled at first, her small fists tightening in the fabric of Ethan's coat. Ethan stroked her hair soothingly. It's okay. She's here to help. Sarah crouched, her movements slow and careful. Hi, Emily, she said in a soft tone, warm enough to melt the edge of fear. You're very brave. I just need to make sure you're not too cold, and that you're not hurt anywhere else. Emily, trembling, nodded faintly. Sarah's gloved fingers brushed lightly across the child's cheeks, checking for frostbite. She inspected the raw, chafed lines on Emily's wrists from the zip ties, her brow tightening with anger she tried to hide. Her core temperature's dropping, Sarah said, standing quickly. We need to warm her up fast. My ambulance isn't far. Officer Halverson stepped closer, breathing heavily from the exertion of the chase and the storm. We'll escort you, he said. His deep voice was steady despite the chaos. Ethan adjusted Emily in his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder again, exhausted and shaking. Shadow walked right at Ethan's heel, his body a moving shield. You're coming with us too, sir, Officer Brooks added. We need your statement, and thank you. A lot of kids wouldn't have survived this storm without someone intervening. Ethan didn't respond immediately. His eyes drifted to Derek being shoved into the back of a police cruiser, head hanging, blood dripping steadily from his sleeve, his body defeated. Ethan felt no triumph, only relief, and a lingering fire inside that hadn't faded since he first saw Emily's note on that window. He reached down, giving Shadow a firm, grateful pat behind the ears. Good boy, he murmured. Shadow let out a soft whine, leaning into the touch. As the officers led them toward the vehicles, Emily lifted her face. Her eyes, red, raw, and frightened, found Ethan's. Thank you, she whispered. The storm raged around them, spinning snow like shards of glass, but Ethan felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, a warmth that felt like purpose, like redemption, like a promise he was never going to break. Emily was safe in his arms. Shadow watched every shadow, and Derek was in custody. The night was still violent, but hope had already won. Winter warmed by kindness. The fluorescent lights of Anchorage General Hospital flickered softly, a gentle contrast to the violent storm still raging outside. Snow hammered against the tall windows like frantic fingers, but inside the pediatric emergency wing, the air held a fragile warmth, thin, trembling, but real. Emily Parker sat on the examination bed, wrapped in 2 layers of thermal blankets. Her cheeks, once raw and streaked with tears, were now a healthier shade of pink thanks to the heated room. Her small body, however, still shook with the intermittent shivers of shock. A nurse had placed warm packs on her hands and feet, tending to the minor cuts on her wrists from the zip ties. The door swung open, and Laura Parker burst inside. Laura was in her early 40s, a slender woman with sandy blonde hair pulled into a messy bun that looked like it had been constructed mid-run. Her skin was fair, almost delicate, and her eyes, a deep hazel, were swollen from hours of crying. She wore a thick beige coat still dusted with snow, and her breath trembled with every word. "Emily!" she cried, rushing forward. The little girl leapt from the bed, blankets sliding to the floor, and collided with her mother's arms. Laura bent down, cradling her daughter's face with shaking hands, kissing her hair over and over. "Oh, my baby, my sweet girl, I was so scared." Laura's voice cracked, dissolving into sobs. Ethan Cole watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame. His navy coat dripped melted snow onto the floor, forming tiny puddles around his boots. The heat from the hospital felt strange on his skin, as if his body didn't quite trust warmth yet. His beard, still dusted with flakes, made him look older than he was. Shadow sat faithfully at his side, massive and silent. His chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. His harness glinted under the fluorescent lights. Service dog, do not pet. Though tonight every child and doctor passing by had paused to stare at him with awe and gratitude. Laura finally turned to Ethan, wiping her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Her voice wavered, thick with emotion. You brought my daughter back to me. You saved her. Ethan shifted awkwardly, pushing one hand into the pocket of his coat. Ma'am, I didn't do it alone. He glanced down at Shadow. He's the real hero. Emily rushed back to Shadow, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck with all the strength her small body could gather. He saved me, she said through sniffles. He's so brave. Shadow lowered his head and gently brushed his nose against her cheek, tail sweeping the floor in soft, slow movements. A nurse passed by and paused, smiling at the scene. Her name tag read Lucy Anders, a petite woman in her early 30s with warm brown skin, curly auburn hair tucked under a scrub cap, and tired but gentle. Green eyes? Lucy had seen many traumatic nights in the ER, but even she paused for a moment, letting the sight soften her posture. Looks like someone here has a guardian angel. Or two, she said softly, before disappearing down the hall. Laura placed a hand on her chest, trying to steady herself. Ethan, I mean it. You returned my whole world to me. If you hadn't been there, I had to be, Ethan replied. I couldn't just watch and do nothing. Something flickered in his eyes, something old and heavy, a memory he would never voice. Laura sensed it and didn't push further. Shadow huffed quietly, leaning against Ethan's leg as if grounding him. News traveled quickly in Anchorage. Within just hours of the rescue, social media posts began spreading. Navy SEAL and his service dog saved child in blizzard. By morning, the local news had begun calling them the Winter Guardians. Ethan didn't know how he felt about that title. Hero worship had never sat comfortably on his shoulders. His victories had always been silent, his losses carried alone. But seeing Emily alive, seeing her smile weakly as Shadow nudged her hand, that felt like something worth holding on to. A few days later, when the storm finally calmed, Ethan received an unexpected invitation. The assembly hall at Denali Ridge Elementary School buzzed with the chatter of students wrapped in colorful winter clothes. Paper snowflakes decorated the walls, and a wide banner stretched across the stage. Celebrate Courage and Kindness Week. Ethan stood near the back, uncomfortable in the borrowed brown jacket someone from the school had insisted he wear. His navy coat was being repaired after the rescue, cut during a medical check when a paramedic insisted on ensuring Ethan wasn't injured beneath it. Shadow sat beside him, alert but calm, earning gasps and excited whispers from the children who had never seen such a large, regal dog up close. Principal Margaret Hayes, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked brown hair and a motherly warmth, stepped up to the podium. Her soft gray eyes scanned the room with deep pride. Students, she announced, today we honor two incredible heroes, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in courage. She gestured toward the corner where Ethan and Shadow stood. But there is someone special who wishes to introduce them. Emily walked onto the stage, still a little shy, her pink sweater sleeves pulled nervously over her hands. The hall quieted instantly. She looked out at her classmates, then at Ethan. That's him, she said, pointing with a small, determined hand. That's Mr. Ethan. And that's Shadow. They saved me from the dark. The applause erupted like thunder. Children rose to their feet. Teachers wiped their eyes. Even Principal Hayes sniffed quietly behind her glasses. Ethan felt his throat tighten in a way he hadn't expected. Shadow looked up at him, nudged his hand as if reminding him to breathe. Emily ran toward him, wrapping her arms around his middle. Ethan bent down, embracing her gently, careful of her still healing wrists. It's okay now, she whispered. I'm not scared anymore. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm glad, sweetheart. Shadow leaned into them both, tail wagging softly. And there, under the warm lights of a school gym, surrounded by clapping hands and grateful hearts, winter no longer felt cruel. It felt like healing. It felt like hope. It felt like the warmth of kindness breaking through the coldest snowstorm. For Emily, for Ethan, and for Shadow, the silent guardian who had turned a night of terror into a story of light. Sometimes, in the coldest nights of our lives, when fear feels louder than hope, a miracle appears in a form we least expect. A Navy veteran with a wounded past, a loyal German shepherd with a warrior's heart, or even a stranger who refuses to look away. And maybe, just maybe, that miracle is God's way of reminding us that His light never truly leaves us, even in the darkest storms. Every day, somewhere in this world, someone is praying for help, for safety, for a reason to keep believing. And often God answers those prayers through ordinary people doing extraordinary acts of kindness. Acts like Ethan's, acts like Shadow's, acts that save not just one child, but restore faith for everyone who hears the story. So, if you're watching this right now, may God bless you, protect your family, and place His angels, seen or unseen, around your home tonight. And if this story touched your heart, please share it to spread hope. Comment your thoughts or your own miracle stories below. Subscribe so you never miss another story, reminding us that goodness still exists. May God guide your steps, warm your spirit, and send you the strength to be someone's miracle too. Amen.